In a small room, Johnny Cash challenged. Real music is simplicity. Jimi Hendrix didn't answer, just took the guitar, and Johnny Cash's 30 years of certainty collapsed in 4 notes. The room was barely 15 feet across. Concrete walls. Single hanging work light casting harsh shadows. A wooden stool. An amplifier humming quietly in the corner. 6 people total, though later only 3 would admit they were there. It was late 1968. Somewhere backstage. The exact venue has been argued over for decades. Some say it was in Nashville, others insist Memphis. A few claim it was a small club in New York after both men had finished their respective sets. The location doesn't matter. What happened in that room does. Johnny Cash stood with his arms crossed, his black shirt and black pants making him look like a shadow with a face. He'd been talking for maybe 10 minutes, his voice that low rumble that could fill a stadium or quiet a room. He was talking about music. Real music. The kind that didn't need tricks or volume or flash. It's about the space between the notes. Johnny was saying. It's about what you don't play. That's what people feel. That's what stays with them. Jimi Hendrix sat on the wooden stool, cradling a Stratocaster in his lap. He hadn't said much. Hadn't needed to. He was listening with that complete stillness he had. The kind of listening that made people uncomfortable because it was so absolute. You know what I mean, Jimmy? Johnny asked, and there was something in his voice. Not quite a challenge. Not quite a question. Something in between. Jimmy nodded slowly. I know what you mean. Do you? Johnny's eyes narrowed slightly. Because when I hear you play, I hear a lot of notes. A lot of volume. A lot of... He paused, searching for the word. A lot of everything. But I don't always hear the silence. The room got very quiet. The other 4 people. A session guitarist, a sound engineer, and 2 hangers-on whose names history forgot, shifted uncomfortably. You didn't challenge Jimi Hendrix. Not about his playing. Not in 1968, when he was reshaping what a guitar could do. But Johnny Cash had never been afraid of uncomfortable moments. Jimmy looked down at the guitar in his hands. His fingers moved slightly, not playing, just touching the strings with that gentleness he had. When he looked back up, his eyes were calm. What do you want to hear? Jimmy asked quietly. Something simple. Johnny said. No tricks. No effects. Just you and the guitar. Show me you can play it simple. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Jimmy stood up slowly, walked to the amplifier, and turned it on. The hum filled the room. He adjusted one knob, volume, nothing else. No distortion. No reverb. No pedals. Just the guitar and the amp, the way it had been done before anyone knew his name. He sat back down on the stool and positioned the guitar across his lap. His left hand found the neck. His right hand hovered over the strings. And then he waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The silence stretched until it became its own presence in the room. Johnny Cash's arms were still crossed, but something in his posture had changed. He was watching Jimmy's hands now, not his face. Jimmy played one note. Not a chord. Not a run. Just one note. E, simple. Clean. He let it ring for 3 full seconds, his fingers barely touching the string, controlling the sustain with such precision that the note seemed to breathe. Then he played the second note. G, a whole step up. He bent it slightly, not the wild bends he was famous for, just a quarter tone, just enough to make it ache. He held it for 4 seconds. The third note was D, lower. Grounding. He played it so softly that everyone in the room leaned forward unconsciously to hear it. And then came the fourth note. A. He played it and let it ring, and in that ringing, something happened that no one in the room could quite explain later. The note seemed to contain all the other notes. All the silence between them. All the space Johnny Cash had been talking about. It was simple. It was 4 notes. And it was devastating. Jimmy let the final note decay completely. 10 seconds of the amp hum carrying the ghost of the sound, before he looked up at Johnny Cash. Johnny's arms had uncrossed. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes had that look people get when they realize something fundamental has shifted beneath them. "That's what simplicity sounds like?" Johnny asked, his voice rough. "That's what listening sounds like," Jimmy said quietly. "The simplicity was always there. I just stopped hiding it." To understand what happened in that moment, you need to understand who Johnny Cash was in 1968. He was 46 years old. He'd been making music for 15 years. He'd had massive hits, I Walk the Line, Folsom Prison Blues, Ring of Fire. He'd defined a sound, created a persona, become an icon. Johnny Cash knew music the way a master craftsman knows wood. Every grain. Every possibility. Every limitation. And he'd built his entire philosophy on one principle: less is more. Strip away the production. Remove the flash. Find the emotional core and play it straight. That's what connected with people. That's what lasted. He'd seen trends come and go. Rock and roll. Surf music. The British invasion. And now this new thing, psychedelic rock, feedback, distortion, guitars that screamed instead of sang. It all seemed like noise to Johnny. Talented noise, sure. But noise nonetheless. Jimi Hendrix represented everything Johnny instinctively distrusted about modern music. The volume. The effects. The showmanship. The wildness. But Johnny was also honest enough to recognize greatness when he heard it, even if he didn't fully understand it. And Jimi Hendrix was great. Undeniably. Frustratingly. So when they'd ended up in the same backstage area that night, through whatever accident of touring schedules and venue bookings, Johnny had been curious. And when curiosity led to conversation, and conversation led to Jimmy picking up that guitar, Johnny had seen an opportunity. To test. To challenge. To prove. Maybe to himself more than anyone, that all the flash and fire still came down to the same fundamentals he'd been preaching for years. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. But now, sitting in this concrete room, listening to 4 notes ring through the cheap amplifier, Johnny Cash was facing a truth he hadn't expected. Jimi Hendrix understood simplicity. He understood space. He understood silence. Maybe better than Johnny did. The difference was that Jimmy had chosen to explore everything else too. And in exploring it, he'd somehow made simplicity even more powerful because now it arrived by choice, not by limitation. The session guitarist, a Nashville veteran named Robert, whose name would be lost to history, later described what he saw in Johnny's face in that moment. "It wasn't anger," Robert said in an interview 40 years later. "It wasn't even surprise. It was recognition. Like he'd been looking at a puzzle for years and someone just showed him the picture on the box." Jimmy set the guitar down gently and stood up. He walked to where Johnny stood and stopped about 3 feet away. He didn't say anything. Just looked at him with those quiet eyes. "I never needed to show you I could play simple," Jimmy said finally. "But you needed to hear it." Johnny nodded slowly. "I did. The volume isn't hiding anything," Jimmy continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's revealing what was always there. The silence you talk about, it's in every note I play. Even the loud ones. Especially the loud ones. Because silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of intention." In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. He picked up the guitar again and held it out to Johnny. "Show me what you hear when you play simple," Jimmy said. Johnny Cash hesitated. He hadn't picked up a guitar in front of another musician. Really played, not performed, in years. And never in front of someone like Jimi Hendrix. But he took the guitar. Sat down on the stool. Felt the weight of the Stratocaster, so different from his own instruments, lighter, sharper. He played. A chord progression he'd known since he was a boy. G, C, D, G. The foundation of 1,000 country songs. Nothing fancy. Nothing new. But as he played, something strange happened. He could feel Jimi listening. Not watching, listening. With that same absolute attention Jimi had shown earlier. And in that listening, Johnny heard his own playing differently. He heard where he rushed. Where he hid. Where he used simplicity as an excuse not to risk. Where he played it safe and called it authentic. He played for maybe 30 seconds before he stopped. Set the guitar down. Looked at Jimi. "I'm a coward," Johnny said quietly. "No," Jimi said immediately. "You're careful. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Being careful built everything you have. Your sound. Your career. Your integrity. That matters." Jimi sat down on the floor, cross-legged, looking up at Johnny. "But being careful for too long can start to feel like being trapped. You stop exploring because you're afraid of losing what you've built." Johnny was quiet for a long moment. "And you're not afraid?" "I'm terrified," Jimi admitted, a small smile on his face. "Every time I plug in. Every time I try something new. But I'm more afraid of staying safe. Because safe music doesn't change anyone. Not even the person playing it." The sound engineer, a kid barely 20 years old named Marcus, later said this was the moment he decided to quit the music business. "I realized I'd never write anything worth remembering," Marcus said in a blog post in 2003. "Not because I wasn't talented. But because I wasn't brave. And I just watched two of the bravest men alive admit they were scared. If they were scared, what chance did I have?" What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. Johnny Cash and Jimi Hendrix sat in that concrete room for another 2 hours. They didn't jam. They didn't trade licks. They just talked. About music. About fear. About what it means to be honest when millions of people are listening. About the difference between authenticity and authenticity as performance. About how sometimes the wildest thing you can do is play 4 notes, and mean every one of them. At some point, someone brought coffee. At another point, the work light flickered and went out for 30 seconds, leaving them in complete darkness, and neither of them stopped talking. When they finally stood to leave, well past 3 a.m., Johnny did something he almost never did. He asked for a favor. "Would you play one of my songs?" Johnny asked. "The way you hear it. Not the way I recorded it. The way you would play it if it was yours." Jimi thought for a moment, then nodded. "Folsom Prison Blues." Johnny's eyebrows raised slightly. "That one?" "That one." Jimi picked up the guitar again. He didn't play the opening riff everyone knew. Instead, he found a drone, low E string, open and resonant. He let it build. Added harmonics. Created a sound like prison bars humming in wind. Like distance. Like time passing in a cell. Then, so quietly Johnny had to lean in to hear it, Jimi began to fingerpick the melody. Not the famous boom-chicka-boom rhythm. Just a melody, stripped bare, played with such tenderness it sounded like a lullaby for the imprisoned. He played for 90 seconds. Never raised the volume. Never added flash. Just that melody, those harmonics, that drone underneath like the sound of a man's heartbeat counting years. When he finished, Johnny Cash had tears on his face. He didn't try to hide them. "That's my song?" Johnny asked. "That's what I hear in your song," Jimi corrected gently. "The loneliness. The way time stretches when you're trapped. Not the rebellion, everyone hears that. The sadness underneath the rebellion. That's what makes it real." Johnny wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "No one's ever played it like that. Maybe because no one was listening for that," Jimi said. "Or maybe because you needed to hear it from someone who wasn't you." The session guitarist Robert later said this was the moment that changed Johnny Cash's approach to recording. After that night, Johnny started leaving more space in his arrangements. Robert recalled. He'd tell producers, "Let it breathe. Let people hear what's not being played." He never explained why. But those of us who were there knew. Johnny reached into his pocket and pulled out a guitar pick. It was worn smooth. He'd been using it for years. He held it out to Jimi. "I want you to have this," Johnny said. "Not because you need it. Because I need you to have it. So I remember tonight. So I remember that simplicity and complexity aren't opposites. They're dance partners." Jimi took the pick, examined it in the dim light, then carefully tucked it into his shirt pocket over his heart. "And I want you to remember something too," Jimi said. "What you built, that careful, honest thing you've been protecting all these years, that matters. Don't hear what I'm saying as you should be more like me. Hear it as you're already doing what you're supposed to do. Just don't let fear make you smaller than you are." They shook hands. Held it for a moment longer than a normal handshake. Two men from completely different worlds who'd found each other in a concrete room and discovered they'd been climbing the same mountain from different sides. As Johnny walked toward the door, Jimi called after him. "Johnny?" Cash turned. "That challenge you gave me, to play it simple, I needed that too. Sometimes I forget that all the fire and volume started with 4 strings and silence. Thank you for reminding me." Johnny nodded once, then walked out into the night. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. 3 years later, Jimi Hendrix was dead at 27. Johnny Cash carried the story of that night with him for the rest of his life. He never told it publicly. Never used it for publicity. But musicians who worked with him in his later years sometimes heard him say strange things during recording sessions. "Leave space there. Let them hear what Jimi heard." Or, "Don't fill every second. Silence is presence, not absence." Or once, during a particularly difficult session in 1994, "I knew a man who could make 4 notes say everything. And he did it by listening first." The guitar pick Jimi took that night was found in his apartment after he died. It was in a small wooden box with 3 other items: a harmonica from Little Richard, a handwritten note from Bob Dylan, and a photograph of his mother. Johnny Cash's pick, the one he'd carried for years before giving it away, was returned to Johnny by Jimi's estate in 1971. Johnny kept it in his wallet until the day he died. He never played with it again. Just carried it. In 2003, Johnny Cash's daughter Roseanne found the pick while going through her father's belongings after his death. On the back, in handwriting she didn't recognize, was written a single sentence. "Real music is listening." She didn't know the story. She didn't know about the room, the challenge, the 4 notes. She just knew her father had carried those words next to his heart for 32 years. Some lessons you learn once and carry forever.